So thanks everybody for joining us. Oh, before I kick off, Will, you want to start the recording?
Yep, we are good.
Sweet. Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us for session 33 of Bears with Engineers on this lovely June 26th. As Will and I always say, this is our favorite workday of the month. So thanks for joining us. We'll go ahead and get things kicked off. We're excited to talk a little bit today um, about some updates to the Kubernetes Visibility Agent, as well as some updates to service reliability management. Will, you want to jump forward on the slide and we'll keep on rolling?
Yes, sir.
All right. So today we actually need to make sure that we're on top of the safe harbor statement because today we're talking about some stuff that has not yet been released. It's currently going to come out in August based on current timeframes. So it may not end up looking the exact same way we show you today. So don't make any purchasing decisions based on these forward-looking statements that we're talking about today. So as usual, we are very informal. We're just going to kind of talk about who we are, why we're here, talk about any news or updates, and then we're going to get straight into the deep nerdiness. So why are we here, right? Will and I built this session as a way to bring together the community to talk about what's everybody doing from a ServiceNow and cloud native technology perspective. There's just not enough, I feel like, conversation around that. And also as an opportunity for us to really talk about the deeper components of the ServiceNow technology and really get into the nuts and bolts of why stuff works the way they work. So we love doing this and we love having you join us, and it's all about the community. So thanks for being with us. So, who are we and what are we drinking? So, I'm an ITOM pre-sale specialist. I have been around the block on the technology world. My beard has the gray to show it, and I've been at ServiceNow for almost 5 years, with a little short stint where I went and ran the platform for a customer, and decided that I missed being here and having these kinds of conversations. And so I'm back and I'm loving being back. And I love to train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, hang out with my family, and play board games. And like I said, it's been 80+ degrees. So I think Corona will be nice and light and refreshing today. So that's what I'm going to have. Will, what about you?
Nice. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Will Hallam. I'm a solution consultant focusing on ITOM. Been a ServiceNow for a little over 4 years. Been doing technology for the better part of 3 decades and specializing in all things around IT ops and especially automating those things and taking advantage of cloud resources, which the adage is true. Cloud's just somebody else's computer, but it's somebody else's computer with lots of cool APIs and things built around it to make it easy to automate doing things within those environments. And I've been getting a lot of enjoyment out of doing that and helping other people do the same. Love to automate those repetitive routine tasks. In my spare time, I enjoy hanging out with my family. I play some pickup hockey and video games for leisure as well. Today, I'll be enjoying a Skull Frog double IPA from Frog Alley Brewing right nearby me in Schenectady, New York.
Nice. I like the name. All right, so so today we're going to talk pretty heavily about Kubernetes Visibility Agent and the update that is coming out in August here. And the big key point is that we're adding back in the capability to do traffic-based detection of connectivity between Kubernetes components. So if you want to move forward, we'll kind of dive into what's next there. It's couple of key pieces, right? Over the last couple of releases, I kind of wanted to highlight a couple of components, right? We added in support for in 2.3, we added in the extensibility feature, which Will's going to spend some time talking about today. This is now you can configure the Kubernetes Visibility Agent to bring in additional resources into the CMDB that it isn't configured to by default. And also we added support for ARM-based nodes in the clusters and the ability to sort of do some configuration of those agents from the ServiceNow platform. And then we added in 2.4, which I have not played with yet, and I want to, the GCP secrets support, as well as getting in a custom root certificate authority. So both of those are kind of useful, but I think what we're going to deep dive on primarily today is the extensibility features and what's on the next slide, which is the upcoming piece in August, which is around the traffic-based connectivity discovery. So what does it do? It now builds traffic-based dependencies and service maps based on information that it's getting from the nodes themselves around where traffic is moving. And then there's two different methods by which we can do this. There's either if you have an existing service mesh like Istio or Linkerd, we can ingest the traffic metrics from the Prometheus endpoint that those service meshes actually feed the traffic metrics into Prometheus, and then we ingest that in from Prometheus and build those connections that way. But I think that the primary piece that we're going to talk about today, because while service meshes are really cool, I'm seeing not too many of them in the wild yet, and also it's just easier to deploy with the second methodology. So now what we've got is a daemon set of other smaller informer patterns that have slightly elevated permissions that enable them to listen to the east-west traffic within the cluster. And in the next slide, we'll dig into kind of what those permissions look like and what the requirements are there. So from a solution architecture perspective, right, this is kind of a quick high-level overview. Again, this is not completely new, right? KVA already had this primary informer pod in here, and it fed into the ECC queue into the ServiceNow instance. Kind of what's new is the other components that are feeding into that, right? So what we'll be digging into today is the new informer pod now has this connections manager inside of it. And there's this daemon set of pods that's deployed on all of the nodes in the cluster that's listening to the traffic on each of those nodes and informing the connections manager, which then feeds that information up into the ServiceNow instance via the ECC queue. So overall, it's a very similar architecture, and it's important to point out that it's still utilizing the informer pattern. So these informer pods that are running as a daemon set are extremely light, and they actually have even less RAM like footprint than the primary informer itself. So this is, I always kind of have been equating this in my head to kind of the original cloud native operations and the way that it ingested traffic there. And this is all much more streamlined and much more much smaller in utilization and capacity and footprint and resources. Dave, go ahead, jump off, man.
Hey, I had a question, right? We're
Mhm.
kind of at the beginning stages to maybe migrate to CNO.
Mhm.
Are we saying this is a replacement or an alternative to doing CNO?
So CNO got renamed
To
to
be
Kubernetes Visibility Agent.
okay, so it is this thing. Okay, now it makes more sense. I was like,
Yep.
why are we going down this path when?
Right, right.
Okay, that makes me
Yeah.
feel better. Okay, I
Yeah.
will shut
Just an
up and listen.
iteration on the existing informer.
Yep.
So I have a bunch of questions that were asked to me today, but I'll wait to the end. But maybe you guys can answer a couple of them. So all right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, we'll dive. If we don't answer them through this, as usual, we'll dive in as we go.
Okay.
So from the installation process on the next slide, I'll kind of talk through that. It's really pretty simple and straightforward. And then I'll actually show you it in my instance. So the key thing, it's always been recommended to use the Helm installation method for CNO, now KVA, and because it's generally kind of best practice for deployment methodologies, and it's generally easier to build into your cluster deployment pipelines, right? So that's kind of always been my recommendation. The main change here now is the stuff highlighted in yellow. Double dash set connections discovery dot method equals ServiceNow. And so if you're using the Istio or Linkerd, it'll have a different equals there. But for now, right, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to deploy this. And if you give it your namespace and the name of it, and then this is the map underneath of it, that is what it looks like now when it actually builds out the Kubernetes connectivity map. And I'll show you that in the instance. Um, so in the next slide, we kind of dig into what the permissions look like. And this is going to be where we're going to get a lot of questions from the security teams. And we'll kind of talk through a little bit of that. So there's two methods by which you can do this. And the non-elevated rights can work and we will get a lot of data, right? However, because we're not catching it in real time, some shorter traffic connections might be missed, and then we won't be able to include them into a dependency map or a service map, right? So if you can get the rights to get the elevated rights with option 2, that's going to be the best, highest fidelity maps that we can create out of this. And let me back up really quick. The reason why this is so much better is because in the past, when we've been talking about Kubernetes components and how do we map them and build service maps out of it, it's all been tag based, right? Which is great and it's wonderful and that's excellent. But there's a possibility that, given the fact that it's dependent upon human interaction of properly applying tags and following the tag policies, that could be missed, right? And things could be inaccurate. Whereas if we're actually ingesting the traffic within the cluster and we're building these maps based on what's actually talking to each other, we have a much better chance of having very real world actual maps of dependencies and service maps. So this is kind of like the next level of fidelity around mapping of Kubernetes components. So that's why all this matters and why it's best, if you can, to get option 2 to get those elevated rights. I understand some security organizations are not going to allow you to get access to the host network and pull all this information and run as root, right? That's a that's a very sticky thing at times. So we added in option 1 with the non-elevated rights, but we just need to understand the pros and cons of the two options. And actually, I think from a flow perspective, let me show that. And then actually, no, let's continue on. Well, I'll kind of walk through service reliability management from a slide deck, and then I can kind of show you it all in the platform. So service reliability management is another capability that we're going to kind of talk about a little bit today. We've talked about it on the show before in the past, but there's a key thing that we've added that Will's actually going to demo, and that's we now have a native app, a mobile app that can receive push notifications, which in the past we were reliant on, SMS or email or text, or phone calls, other things, right? And the native app with the push notifications is going to be a kind of a game changer for how we can operate and manage alerts, and managing that from a service reliability perspective, right? So the whole idea is within SRM is we have a native platform on the platform that is designed specifically around distributed team ownership of the services and management and configuration of the monitoring integrations and the alerting integrations, so that all of that stuff doesn't have to live within the centralized ServiceNow platform team or the ServiceNow IT team. You can have that be done distributed based on more of the like SRE type model, right? And so the idea is it's quick, it's scalable, folks can get things set up quickly. And now as we are starting to enable other SRE style organizations, it'll be a more useful tool for them. So I think there's just one more slide on SRM.
I
I
I
lied.
think I added one or two more, which
Yep.
either of us can kind of speak to as.
Yep. So the idea is you've got the team-based operations components, right? And then service level objective management. And all of this is available if you have the AIOps Operator Pro. Basically, if you own ITOM Health today, you already own this stuff. We try and not talk about pricing and packaging on the show, but just so you know. So service level objective management is how do you configure your service level objectives, your service level indicators, and your error budget management. You don't have to install SRM in order to get that, but SRM is dependent upon that. So if you install SRM, you will also install service level objective management. And then SRM gives you the ability to actually provision teams, request the teams, and configure all of those monitoring integrations all directly within Service Operations Workspace. And then I think if you build out the rest of that, it adds in now kind of this new capability of the mobile experience, which Will's going to show today, right? So now you actually can directly notify on-call teams based on mobile push notifications. Will, you want to talk about the next slide?
Yep. So just just as an aside, when we send out the slide deck, we'll have a link to the What's New in AI Ops official deck that includes kind of all this, but this just kind of encapsulates the highlights for SRM specifically. So we've been talking about the mobile app. The form that takes is you may be familiar with the existing ServiceNow mobile agent app, which previously was really focused on ITSM. So if you were a team that was focusing on incident fulfillment and handling, that was the mobile app that you could use to keep track of, new incidents in your team's queue, reassign them or take ownership of them, and get push notifications when those were created. And so what's been done is ITOM functionality has been built into that app now. So if you're in an org that's focused more on alerts or trying to shift left to focus more on alerts before they turn into incidents, now you can use that same mobile app to get push notifications when an alert gets generated that's in your team's queue. And the reason that that's kind of a big deal is when SRM first came out, if you wanted to do those external notifications, you had to either rely on email or you had to have an external telephony integration like Twilio, which not the end of the world, but this gets rid of that requirement. You just install this mobile app and you're going to get notifications. And I'm going to pray to the demo gods and try and show you that live in a couple minutes. So a couple other things that got added to SRM in this last release. We converged the integrations launchpad experience. So when SRM first came out, it had kind of its own fork of the integrations launchpad that was focused just on primarily webhook based notification integrations. And so now that's been combined so that anything available integrations launchpad can be configured by one of these federated teams. And so there's no more kind of trying to figure out, okay, which view do I have to look at this integration in order to get it configured. And there's been a bunch of code improvements around managing on-call, administering teams and services within SRM, and optimizations against the out-of-the-box escalation workflows. And also some additional flexibility has been added to the SLO SLI capability. Specifically, when it first came out, in order to establish an SLI, it was essentially a filter statement saying if you get these kinds of alerts that are bound to this particular app service. And so now they've extended that. So now you can actually bind, the alert can be bound to any CI that's part of the service, and it'll roll up into your SLI and then contribute to your SLO.
All right. Let me actually shift gears back to Kubernetes Visibility Agent, and I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like from a deployment and configuration standpoint. And then I'll show you it in the platform, and then we'll shift gears and have Will show us the SRM mobile experience and a few other things. So just really quickly, right, like the Helm installation process, it's actually very straightforward. It's a one-liner. I'm not going to actually install it now because I've already got it installed and I don't want to mess it up again. It's just a one-liner script that says, hey, right, install in this namespace, right? Accept the EULA because we have to accept the EULA. And then here's the instance name to connect it to. Here's the fact that I want to turn on the connections discovery. My cluster name, I always specify that. And then here's the name of what I want to deploy and the chart that I'm going to deploy it from. You'll notice that's a locally provided chart because I'm running beta code. That is not out yet. And so if you try and copy and paste this, it will not work for you. So let me really quickly show you. So it's already installed. And so I'll kind of show you the status of it. Helps if I remember that I'm on a Mac and not a Windows box. So here's the status output, right? So here's the Helm chart. Here's what the status is. It's kind of listing all of the components. So let's actually just do really quick. DTL, but we'll go CNO. Yep. So because I deployed this with the ServiceNow connections discovery method, it deployed the standard pod of the informer itself, right? So here's the informer, and that is what is communicating between the cluster and the ServiceNow platform, right? And then I have a daemon set of the pods that are listening for the traffic connections. This is only a 2-node cluster. I'm not running anything production, right? So daemon set by default deploys 1 pod in every node in the cluster. And so because there's only 2 nodes, I have two pods in that daemon set, and it's deployed them across that cluster, and they're listening for traffic on each of the individual nodes. And then they're forwarding that traffic information into the primary informer, which ingests all that information and sends it up to the ECC queue for the ServiceNow platform to kind of manage and deploy that. So let me actually show you what that looks like in the ServiceNow platform, right? So this is that Kubernetes service, right? It's the front end external. And I'm gonna show you there's this Kubernetes connectivity button up here, right? And that button has been around for a while. And this is what, hang on, this is what it used to look like. Um, and so I was like, what's the value of this button? Right?
Oh,
And
dear.
so now, when you do that, you get this view, right? So this is now the view of that front end external Kubernetes service. And here's the deployment that it's attached to. And then here are all of the other things that that pod set is communicating with, right? And so now you can see, oh, here's the traffic patterns. Here's what it's communicating with, right? It goes down to the cart service, which is, utilizing the cart service deployment, which is communicating with the Redis cart service, which is communicating with the Redis cart deployment, right? This is a pretty standard Google microservices demo. So, it's got nice little microservices broken out into it. It's very clear and straightforward. But what's the key thing is that this is wildly better than the old view of this, right? So, and you used to get something kind of like this by being able to do tag-based service maps, right? But it's important to note that this is a dependency view. This is not a tag-based service map, right? This is not a service map at all. So this is now understanding, just without building any kind of a service map, that if this Redis cart service or this particular Redis cart deployment, if that tips over and starts having errors, that's going to impact the whole rest of this dependency view, right? This is a big step forward. So one of the really nice things about that now is that you can also now just click this create service map button and it'll create a service map out of that. And I'm not going to do that right now because I've already created a service map. So this is that service in service operations workspace, right? So it's, front end external at hipster shop at MTG AKS demo, right? And so we can go and look in the details and here's what it's at, here's what it looks like. And then we can go look at the service map. And this is now the unified service map. And you'll see that I actually have this thing is red because I have set up using service reliability management, I have set up ingestion of alert data from Prometheus. So I've deployed Prometheus in my cluster and I've set up Alert Manager to be able to forward any alert data from Prometheus feeding into Alert Manager, and then Alert Manager feeds the ServiceNow platform. And this configuration, and what's interesting about this, right, you'll see that I'm actually signed in as myself, right? I am not an admin on this instance. And so I was able, because I'm a service owner, I set myself up as a service owner here. I was able to go in and build this entire integration to ingest alerts from start to finish all by myself without having to rely on the central ServiceNow team, right? So you can see here's this integration. Here's all of the events that integration has brought in. I, used Will's Prometheus values that is really like wildly off base and just throws random errors, right? Just so that we could get some errors and bad things happening here, right? But you can see those services. And so in addition to that these components are all part of service reliability management, right? The integration to set it up is really quite easy, right? You click add an integration. I just typed in Prometheus. I found this Prometheus source. I put in the details around what I was going to call it, right? Gave it a little description. It all comes directly into the instance. So I have to set up a push connector from Alert Manager. I won't get into too many details because I want to make sure we leave time for it. But then it gives you a URL to put in your alert manager configuration to actually push this in. So this is a webhook. You set it up, it pushes the data in, and it comes in already with the source information and the sys ID that the thing should be attached to. So it's very clear and easy and straightforward. And if you're familiar at all with Prometheus and Alert Manager, which most of your Kubernetes teams are going to be, setting this up is quite straightforward. And then I started setting up a service level objective and service level indicators for this hipster shop service, right? So what I was just saying is like, if an alert comes in with front index, with this configuration item, and the metric is availability, then that's going to reduce down for my service level indicator, right? That's my indicator, and that will burn down my service level objectives of 99.9 time. And when you look at that, it's kind of crazy. This gives you how much error budget you have and what your burn rate is. There's only 3 seconds left because there's not very much time left in the month, right? And you can get some like high level indicators and overviews of how things are happening. And you'll see that, hey, look, I actually have an alert impacting and multiple incidents impacting this particular service. And it's important to note that this is from a service owner SRE team viewpoint, right? Like this is not, a ServiceNow platform team kind of viewpoint. So anyway, I
Hey,
kind
hey,
of like,
Mike, there's a
yeah,
request in the chat to zoom up your browser window to make it a
yes,
little
thank
easier.
you. Yep, good call. Got to remind me. Is that better?
That should be good.
Okay. All right. All right. So yeah, let me actually jump back into this service map. Now you can see it better with a little bit better zoomed in, right? So this is the unified service map here. And it's the same kind of thing, right? You can see all of these communications lines. You can see what's communicating with what, this checkout service is communicating with the product catalog, all of that stuff. Any questions about that before we switch over to Will showing you about the config extensions on KVA and the SRM phone alerts?
Just a comment that one of the big things this does is it captures that inter-service dependency or communication. Whereas as good as you could get tag-based maps to be with traversal rules, you were still only able to bring in CIs that had those common values within the labels, the Kubernetes labels.
Yep.
Whereas what this is actually doing is it's actually looking at who's talking to who, and it's generating a map from that, which is great because it closes that kind of inter-service communication gap, as well as, like you said, Mike, it's not reliant on humans kind of specifying it in the metadata. It's telling you what's actually going on in your cluster. So it can uncover dependencies that maybe you don't know are there because it's actually pulling in, here's who's talking to who. And that's something, we've been able to do for a while with top-down service mapping, but top-down was really and still is really focused on those more traditional server-based workloads where you can SSH or PowerShell into the server and enumerate the connections that are in place, look at application config files and that kind of thing, none of which is traditionally something you can do with containerized workloads. So this is a really great step. We're looking forward to seeing it go GA. Fingers crossed, August.
Agreed. Sandeep had a question.
Yes, sir.
Oh, what is the performance impact in running these new informer pods on clusters?
Yeah, I just want to check, like, will there be any impact on the clusters, because they'll be collecting huge amount of data, right?
So it's collecting the traffic data, right? But it's doing so in the lightweight informer pattern, which is intended to handle these types of kind of like high volume, data management capabilities. So from an architectural perspective, this is about as slim as it gets from a performance perspective. So that being said, I personally haven't run, load testing with this particular pattern. I would be shocked if it has a significant impact. And we can take that as a takeaway to see if the dev team can share with us any load testing that they've done prior to this.
Yeah, I'm going to make a note. My expectation is that before this goes live, there'll be either an update to the existing, because there is an existing support KB out there talking about performance impact of the informer and how to tune it based on cluster sizing. And so my expectation is that there will be either an update to that existing KB or a new KB that specifically talks about these little kind of subordinate pods that will get spun up as part of the daemon set. But we're kind of, to get ready for this, we were actively talking with the dev team. So we'll just kind of use that dialogue and get a direct answer. And I'll include it when we send out our wrap up emails. I'll include whatever we hear back in terms of an answer to that.
Thanks, Phil.
Great question. Any other questions? All right, Will.
All right. So since we were just talking about KVA, what I'll do is I'll just talk about a little bit of an experiment I did with using the customization capability that's been introduced to KVA. And then I can pivot into the mobile alerting capability that the addition of ITOM to the mobile agent app has brought to the table. So let's see. And grab the share. Okay, so the process for customizing what KVA discovers and what attributes of either the new things that you're telling it to discover or existing resources are pulled into the CMDB is heavily documented in a support knowledge base article, and there'll be a link to that in the slide deck that we send out as part of our wrap ups. I was actually pleasantly surprised with the wealth of supplementary documentation around KVA that's available on our support site. There's actually this new capability. They've actually introduced an API class script include within the instance where you can use it to get on-demand information from basically anything running in your cluster that has the informer running in it. And there's also a KB article on that as well. So you can kind of do ad hoc queries out to a Kubernetes cluster if it's got the informer running inside it, subject, of course, to whatever permissions are being given to the service account that the informer is using to run. So what I did was I just took the pretty much the simplest of examples from that knowledge base article and just put it into practice within one of my own clusters. And that was just basically telling the informer, hey, in addition to all of the existing resources that you're capturing when you're running discovery, either a full cluster discovery or listening to the API server, I want to also pull in config map type resources. And so the way that I did that was creating this small YAML file, which the spec for the YAML file is included in the knowledge base article. Essentially, it's just a YAML array consisting of 3 keys, the API group or groups that you're going to query, API version or versions, and then the resource or resources. So I included that. And then there's essentially there's included in the KB is the syntax for invoking that via either a Helm command or using a raw YAML manifest. Now, one thing that I noticed, just point of information, if folks want to play with this and they kind of get some, have some trouble if they're trying to use a Helm upgrade command versus a fresh Helm install, is I've noticed the way this works is it takes the contents of your YAML file, puts it in a Kubernetes config map. And then the informer reads that config map and uses that to query other resources besides what it's kind of coming out of the box configured to discover. What I saw was tried to update that config map via a Helm upgrade command. It for some reason wasn't picking up the changes. And so the workaround that worked for me was I just uninstall the informer and then just reinstall it with a fresh Helm command. I don't know yet if that's kind of a known behavior or something particular to my environment. So I just wanted to put it out there. So if somebody's trying it out and they don't see the corresponding updates showing up in their config map, which looks like this. Oh. My autocomplete is having a moment. So what happens is when you deploy the informer, as Mike kind of showed earlier, is it generates this config map called additional resources, and then it appends the instance name. And so if I enumerate that out, so we can kind of see that right there here at the bottom, it's got resources values that I've added in. So it's saying, hey, whoops, let's get back down to the bottom here, saying, hey, I want to know about config maps in addition to all the out of the box resources. And so by default, that's going to instantiate it into a table called Kubernetes components. And so what I'll do is I'll just show you how that translates into the and the knowledge base article goes into a lot of detail. You've really got at your fingertips all kinds of levers and knobs that you can use to adjust how this stuff is showing up in your CMDB. You can really, between the YAML file specification, and there's kind of a companion file. In addition to resources, you can specify which Kubernetes attributes map to which attributes in the CMDB. And that's via a mappings array, which is kind of similar. That's actually, that's up here, where you basically saying you can specify relationships as well as specific field mappings. So it's really, they've kind of peeled back the covers on the informer and given the customer access to really customize the behavior while maintaining, they're still running that same informer image. So it's a lot more, it's configuration, it's not customization, which I think is always kind of a good, that's the good side of the line to be on when it comes to that. So if I want to look at what that looks like in the instance, just with that simple YAML addition. Just go to the Kubernetes component table, which essentially is kind of the parent table for all the out of the box Kubernetes classes.
Mhm.
And then I group it by kind. So now we can see I've got all of these config maps. If I show just that group, it essentially it's enumerating every single config map within my cluster. And so what's nice there is the config map is generally how Kubernetes services are told what to do. The image itself is very kind of generic, and then it looks at one or more config maps to tell it, here's your specific job. And so by inventorying these and then using that corresponding, the companion mapping capability, you can literally kind of tie things together. So that somebody puts in a change or something's going through a DevOps pipeline that says, hey, we're tweaking the config map. It'll show you that impact all the way through to that set of business services. And with the, the upcoming network connection enumeration, it'll show you the true business context of that change. And like if somebody fat fingers a line on that config map, here's like worst case, what could happen if that goes south.
Yep.
Okay, so kind of closing the book on KVA. Of course, don't be shy about throwing out more questions, but
actually, before we shift gears, there's one KVA question that I want to answer, and then
yeah. In the meantime, I'm gonna hit my Kubernetes node with a hammer to try and generate some mobile notifications. So go right ahead, Mike.
Yeah, good idea. William, I'll get to your question kind of post this, but Durga, you said which one's better, KVA with traffic permissions versus ServiceNow Cloud Observability / Lightstep? And so I would say it's kind of two slightly different use cases. Really, Cloud Observability / Lightstep is going to be more on point when we're thinking about like traces and metrics and like the health of the application that's running inside of it, right? And the and then KVA with the traffic permissions is going to be more along the lines of what's communicating with each other, right? So if you're not looking for traces and the health of the internal applications themselves, then I would say go with KVA with traffic permissions, right? If you're looking more for that, like what's the health of the application itself and how it's communicating and all the traces and things that Lightstep brings to the table, ServiceNow Cloud Observability, then yeah, that's the way to go. But I would start with KVA with traffic permissions first. Just my personal take. All right, back to you, Will. Did it break yet?
No mobile notifications yet. Give it another minute. I've got active alerts, as we can see in the app that I kept specifically for in case my attempt at live generating new alerts took some time. I do see there's a question in chat from Michael saying with ACC, it can only communicate with one instance, which can make it challenging. I assume Kubernetes Informer is similar best practice for testing. So Kubernetes Informer is a little better in that regard, in that you can run, the Informer is very lightweight. The image itself is like 30 megs. It does occupy a memory footprint commensurate with the size of the cluster. So if you've got a super huge cluster, then there, if you want to run multiple informers, then there will be, kind of a linear curve in terms of the memory that it will consume. But if you're talking about kind of testing where you have different subprods or what have you that you want to send the same Kubernetes data to, that's the nice thing about Kubernetes is it runs everything in a namespace. So you can just, I actually do this on a routine basis. I've got, 3 or 4 instances that I'm running informers for in my same test cluster. And I just put each one in its own namespace. I generally kind of name the namespace after the name of the instance so I can keep track. But that is, just kind of at table stakes, just kind of comes with Kubernetes. And it's kind of nice that you can go ahead and do that. And like I said, for super heavy scaled clusters, then just bear in mind that if one informer takes a gig of RAM, then two informers will take 2 gigs of RAM. But it's like bytes per, and that's one of the things that the scale knowledge base article that will include a link in the slide deck as well. That's one of the things that it covers, is kind of how to set expectations as far as how much RAM the informer is going to take based on your cluster size.
Yep. And I was going to say, in addition to that, I'm running 2 different versions right now in the same cluster, right? I've got the currently released version going to my kind of like standard demo instance. And then I've got this new kind of pre-release test version also running in that same cluster going to my Beers with Engineers instance. So you can run multiple different versions of the informer in the same cluster. And I've not had any issues with that so far.
So I still haven't gotten a notification for a new alert. That might be because some of the alerts that will trigger have to occur when the so like here's my Prometheus, or no, look, sorry, I'm sharing 2 screens, is confusing. I'm looking at my Prometheus instance on my Kubernetes cluster, and it hasn't alerted yet because most of the stuff is around like container restarts and the like, which haven't failed yet because the container hasn't restarted. It just kind of disappeared. So I restarted the Kubernetes node. So we'll see if that generates a Prometheus alert or not. And essentially, the main addition, this is what I'm running on my phone, is the standard ServiceNow agent app. It just now it understands the concept of alerts and not just incidents. So if you're working on alerts within your organization, you now have mobile access to that. When an alert gets updated, you'll get a mobile notification, and you can perform the same kind of triage as well as reassigning or taking ownership of an alert. This one happens to be assigned to me already. If it did not, there would be a button down at the bottom here, which allowed you to take ownership of it. And then also, view secondary alerts to see what else is going on with your service. And so again, it just kind of takes one more complication off the table. You don't have to get, install a Twilio integration just to get your mobile notifications from SRM.
Looks like you went, maybe I'm wrong, you went from 5 notifications to 55 while we were talking there.
Oh, that's a good call. I did notice that. Because if you've got the app open, it's actually not going to do like a phone notification. So here we go. It's like, here's all the notifications that have come in as a result of me basically shutting down one of my Kubernetes nodes. Yeah, good. That was a good spot, Mike. I forgot that if you've got the app open in the foreground, it's not going to pop a traditional notification up at the top of the phone.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's pretty nice, man.
Right? I mean, honestly, it's a much more solid linkage than just a traditional SMS.
Yeah.
And certainly, an email notification, which just kind of goes out there hoping that you get it. Whereas this is, actively communicating with your instance and maintaining a list of active notifications and alerts that are in your queue.
So Chris had a great question. Can the mobile app override a low volume ring or do not disturb setting on the phone? That's not something that I've played with that I can tell you that for certain.
I'm gonna make a note right now. We'll ask Dennis what the deal is with that.
Yeah, if it can't, that's probably something that should be added to the queue.
Yeah, there should be a setting, which intuitively, because this is based on the app that's been in place for a while for ITSM use cases, I would I'm kind of on the like 75% side of the fence, thinking that they probably would have put that in just for handling incidents, because it's kind of it makes sense, right? You want to at least have the option of saying, hey, I want to know if this comes off, even if I've got my phone on do not disturb or whatever.
Yeah. So just really quickly, side note, we've recently run a couple of workshops on service reliability management where we get a little bit deeper in the configuration and setup and the more broad capabilities. And those were recorded. So I think we can probably try and include a link to the recording in one of the wrap-up emails too, if you want to go watch that and deep dive a little more on SRM. Because again, you may already own it, right? So it might be worthwhile looking into. So let me pivot really quick and answer William's question. So William's question in the Q&A was, how can we manage standalone containers, non-KVA, versus Kate's orchestrated containers, KVA, and a sense of holistic container management in the CMDB alongside with each other per se? So I'm gonna say I'm gonna guess and assume and come off mute or send me a message if I'm wrong. But I mean, I think you're saying like when we are running a discovery against a server or whatever, and it's running Docker or something like that, and it runs the Docker pattern and discovers all the Docker containers on that machine. Those are going to look different than a KVA discovered container, right? And so how do we manage those? What's that look like? I think the key thing there is understanding what your discovery process looks like when that Docker pattern gets run, and then managing the life cycle of the container um, based on that discovery process. I will tell you that my belief is, unless you, as a rule, are doing a lot of kind of standalone Docker containers, I'm not a huge fan of that Docker pattern, just because it has a tendency to, I know this is the Mike Gallagher answer, don't skewer me, but it has a tendency to add stuff to the CMDB and then like never remove it. Especially because it's dependent upon actually getting access to the machine and running that Docker pattern. So it's something to think about. And ultimately, I believe that containers generally should have a much shorter kind of like deletion cycle and archival strategy than other resources within the CMDB. So I would think about what your data rules are around that and how you can potentially set up some rules within the CMDB data manager to clean up those that have been sitting around for a long time and haven't been discovered recently. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if it didn't.
Yeah, that definitely helped. I also wanted to know the CMDB CI perspective as to how the discovery admin supposed to look into like one place than the other, because it's not really covering in one workspace menu or anything like that, or even from the table perspective. So if you can input on those, that'd be great as well.
Well,
Yeah,
the
that's a good
containers
point.
themselves, whether they're hosted kind of natively on Docker or via Kubernetes, they're going to be in the same they're the same CI class, same CMDB table. It's really they're just going to have different relationships where, like something that's running as part of Kubernetes, the container is going to have a relationship up to the pod. Whereas a Docker just a native Docker container will just have a relationship up to that Docker host. So as far as seeing all the containers, that's not really an issue. Differentiating between these are native Docker containers, these are Kubernetes containers, that's a little more nuanced because I don't know off the top of my head that you can just look at the container record by itself without looking at what relationships it has and know just from looking at that single record whether it's, you know, native Docker or Kubernetes. But they're not kind of two separate from a container perspective. They're not two separate lists. They're all in that same the container table. They're all going to be linked to images in the image table. So when it comes to like doing the scan for container inventory, it doesn't matter whether it's in Kubernetes or Docker, you'll get a full list of all your containerized software regardless. So there's not, it may not be as big of a kind of gap between those two options or those two potential, you know, container hosting scenarios as the customer might think, because they're all just sitting in the same, the containers are all sitting in the same table.
Yep. Agreed. All right. I just noticed that we are over time. So let's wrap up the main part of the session and then we'll open up for Q&A after that, if you have time to hang out with us.
Yeah. So here are the links, and if there's any that I mentioned that aren't already on the page, they'll be there by the time we send out the deck. We've been doing Q&A. Just a quick teaser for our next session. We're planning on talking about pushing metrics into the metric intelligence API endpoint. There's been different kind of approaches there over the last couple of years. So we're hoping to kind of provide the latest and greatest on that front. It's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting setup. It's, you know, leverages your mid servers to do a lot of the lifting. And it's really flexible. And there are some existing and upcoming out of the box integrations for pushing metrics into that. So we're going to dig into that next month on the 24th of July. And yeah, so that's our prepared. I'll stop the recording and we can just commence with the airing of grievances. I mean, the just unstructured Q&A for anyone who's still got time and has questions that are on or off topic. Where's the recording off button? There we go.